Many of us remember the backstage incident between Jorge Masvidal and Leon Edwards in 2019 in England, where they got into a scuffle backstage. The famous three-piece and a soda line from Jorge Masvidal was bred from this moment. Game bred from this moment. Jorge Masvidal is talking about a UFC comeback, and he talked about it being at the Super Bowl. I'll play that clip in just a moment, but this has me wondering, is the UFC planning a pay-per-view in New Orleans in February during Super Bowl weekend? They could do it in the arena there where the New Orleans Pelicans play. And so first off, we're going to talk about this fight, but we are also going to build a UFC New Orleans card. But first, I'm going to play this clip right here of Jorge Masvidal talking about his UFC return. So stick around to hear what I think the UFC should book if they do UFC New Orleans during Super Bowl weekend in 2025. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. All right, guys, so before we get into the video, please make sure to like, subscribe, become a channel member if you want extra content, all that good YouTube stuff. Thank you very much. Back to the video. So in this clip right here, Jorge Masvidal with Damon Martin for MMA Fighting talks about his UFC return, who it could be, and this is where he mentions that it could be at the Super Bowl.
Is there a chance it could be this year, or are you thinking 2025?
It could be this year. Vegas, December 7th. I knocked Michael Chandler dead on his ass. It could be next year. Super Bowl, knock somebody else on their ass. I don't know, man. I don't.
So that's what he talks about at the Super Bowl. And now, even though I could be totally reaching here, I am curious as to whether or not the UFC is actually going to do a Super Bowl weekend card in New Orleans. Now, if that's the case, we got to build a card, all right? So here we are. We have the UFC Super Bowl weekend card, and this is where the Super Bowl is going to be held on Sunday, February 9th, 2025. Now, if the UFC was to do a Super Bowl weekend card, they'd obviously do it on a Saturday night, and obviously they're not going to do an arena of this size. That's not really up their alley. They really prefer the arenas. That's what Dana has said time and time again. He prefers the atmosphere of an arena for fights. But also, this is all going to be tied up with Super Bowl stuff anyway. So they would do this at the Smoothie Center where the New Orleans Pelicans play. This is where they like to do it, is typically basketball sized arenas. So now that we've established where it's going to be, if it was to potentially happen, we need to build a UFC Super Bowl weekend UFC Louisiana card. All right, so we're going to start off with the main card opener. Now, I've taken into account the way that the UFC likes to book fights. What they'll typically do is they'll do an exciting male fight, ranked male fight to open the main card, and then they'll give us a woman's fight as the second fight on the main card, and then they'll go into feature, co-main, and main. So I've taken that into account, also with the fact that the UFC would be wanting to book their stars from Louisiana, or not, one of them's a star, one of them's just a ranked fighter. But so we'll start off with that. First off, that would be opening the main card, Brendan Allen from Louisiana, ranked at middleweight, ranked 6th, I think. And I have him win or lose this coming weekend at UFC Paris. I think you put him up against Paulo Costa. You do Brendan Allen versus Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa's coming off of a loss. Brendan Allen is, even with a win over Imavov this weekend, is not going to be looking at a title shot. It's so packed at the top of middleweight right now. So Paulo Costa, big enough name that they'll still let him fight up in the rankings off of a loss. And Brendan Allen, win or lose, going to need an opponent. Opening the main card of a big pay-per-view, it would be, you do a hometown guy or a home state guy and Paulo Costa, big name, perfect matchup to open up the main card. Then we move on to the women's fight that they always would sneak in. They always sneak in on the main cards of pay-per-views after an exciting main card opener. And what I have here is, so Super Bowl weekend, this is going to be a big weekend. They're going to do a female fight of people that are popular on social media that will aid this event being bigger. And I think what you do is you do 2 ranked female flyweights, and one of them is probably one of the most talked about women on social media. You guys know what I'm talking about. You do Tracy Cortez, ranked 12th at flyweight, and you do her against Casey O'Neill. 12 versus 15 at flyweight, main card, second fight of the main card for UFC. This would be like UFC 312 or something like that. We move on from there to the feature fight. And this is where the 2 fighters that we just talked about, Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards. I wouldn't have put that on a card like this in that location, but it makes a lot of sense. He talked about it. The UFC likes to book things that the fighters will talk about in interviews and on social media. It does definitely sway the fans that way, and then the UFC then books it. So good fight, fun fight for Leon, because Leon, coming off of the loss to Bilal, I think he would much rather fight Jorge Masvidal than that's coming out of retirement technically, because he was boxing. He was not doing MMA. Then he'd rather fight Jorge Masvidal than Shavkat Ian Gary, Jack Della Maddalena. I'm telling you, Leon Edwards would, over those guys, compared to those guys, Leon Edwards would take a Jorge Masvidal fight in a heartbeat. Jorge Masvidal being on this card would actually make a lot more sense when I consider that another hometown star in Louisiana, Dustin Poirier, is Masvidal's teammate. So you put him on the main card, got teammates on the main card. They're both training. You know, they do things like this, guys from the same gym, fighting on the same timeline. Now, what do you do with Dustin Poirier? I was thinking about Colby Covington at 170, but if this is going to be a retirement fight for Dustin, then you go and you do it in a fight that's not bad blood, split 1-1, and also possibly a retirement for this other fighter. You do Gaethje Poirier trilogy as the co-main event to the Super Bowl weekend pay-per-view, hypothetical Super Bowl weekend pay-per-view. And then we move on to the main event. So that'd be sick. One of these guys, one of these guys gets a win, that maybe they fight for a belt, or they both fight and retire. And then we move on to the main event. And this was a lot tougher because it's got to be a title fight. So I was looking through, who could they do? 25. Pantoja's not booked, but he's not going to main event an event like this. 35, Merab. He's probably going to fight Umar in Saudi Arabia. 45, you don't know what's going to happen with Holloway, but 55, there it is. Pushed back to 2025, was originally going to be at UFC 308 in October in Abu Dhabi. You do Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan for the lightweight belt. I was slightly hesitant to make this the main event or even have this on this card, but the UFC did do Islam versus Dustin in America, in New Jersey. So that tells you the UFC is comfortable with Islam main eventing on US soil in a pay-per-view. So there we have it. There is my UFC 312, 313, something like that. UFC Super Bowl weekend, UFC New Orleans main card of a pay-per-view. Brendan Allen, Paulo Costa, Tracy Cortez, Casey O'Neill, Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, and Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you like this card? What fights would you have made? Let me know your thoughts on the matchups. Do you think Masvidal is actually coming back to MMA? Let me know your thoughts down below. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. If you're interested in supporting the channel further, then become a channel member today for access to members only live streams, vlogs, and some other members perks. So click the link in the description down below or the join button on our channel homepage to become a member today. If you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, go check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World, and go check out my weekly comedy podcast, What's Up Bro, with Wyatt and Bo. Both of those are linked in the description down below. Go watch this suggested video, and we'll see you next time.